Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to yet another episode of History and Truth. Now we are at episode 2 of the War of 1812 on the Niagara region. We are joined by Mark Rum of St. Catharines, Jeff Miller of Guelph, and our cameraman Andrew Morris of Toronto. The Siege of Detroit, also known as the Surrender of Detroit or the Battle of Fort Detroit, was an early engagement in the British-U.S. War of 1812. A British force under Major General Isaac Brock, with Native American allies under Shawnee leader Tecumseh, used bluff and deception to intimidate U.S. Brigadier General William Hull into surrendering the fort and town of Detroit, Michigan, along with his dispirited army, which actually outnumbered the victorious British and Indians. The British victory reinvigorated the militia and civil authorities of Upper Canada, who had previously been pessimistic and affected by pro-U.S. agitators. Many Indians in the Northwest Territory were inspired to take up arms against U.S. outposts and settlers. The British held Detroit for more than a year before their small fleet was defeated on Lake Erie, which forced them to abandon the western frontier of Upper Canada. American plans and moves. Tension was increasing between the United Kingdom and the United States in the early months of 1812. Michigan Territory Governor William Hull urged President James Madison and Secretary of War William Eustis to form an army which would secure the Northwest Territory against Indians who were being incited by British agents and fur trading companies to take up arms against the United States. It was urgently necessary to reinforce the outpost of Detroit, which had a population of 800 and a garrison of 120 soldiers. It was also suggested that this army might invade the western districts of Upper Canada, where support might be expected from the many recent immigrants from the United States who had been attracted by generous land grants. Madison and Eustis concurred with this plan and offered command of the army to Hull, an aging veteran of the American Revolutionary War. He was reluctant to take the appointment, but no other officer was available with his prestige and experience. He accepted after repeated pleas from Madison and was commissioned as a brigadier general in the United States Army. His army consisted of 3 regiments of Ohio militia under Colonels Lewis Cass, Duncan MacArthur, and James Findlay. Hull took command of them at Dayton, Ohio on 25th May, but found that they were badly equipped and ill-disciplined, and no arrangements had been made to supply them on the march. He made hasty efforts to remedy the deficiencies in equipment. The army marched north from Urbana, Ohio on 10th June, joined by the 4th U.S. Infantry under Lieutenant Colonel James Miller. Hull ignored an earlier route established by Anthony Wayne and created a new route to Detroit across the Great Black Swamp area of northwest Ohio. He received a letter from Eustis on 26th June that was dated 18th June, warning him that war was imminent and urging that he should make for Detroit with all possible expedition. So he hastened his march. His draft horses were worn out by the arduous march, so he put his entrenching tools, medical supplies, officers' baggage, dispatches, some sick men, and the Army's band aboard the packet vessel Cuyahoga at the foot of the Maumee River to be transported across Lake Erie. Eustis had sent his first letter of 18th June by special messenger. Congress had passed the declaration of war later that day, but Eustis sent a letter with this vital information only by ordinary mail. On 28th June, the postmaster at Cleveland, Ohio, hired an express rider to rush the letter to Hull, but even this arrived only on 2nd July. The British ambassador in Washington had sent the news urgently to Britain and Canada, and the military commanders in Canada had, in turn, hastened to inform all their outposts of the state of war. On 2nd July, the unsuspecting Cayuga was captured by General Hunter, a Canadian manned armed brig of the Provincial Marine under the command of Lieutenant Frederick Rolette, near the British post at Amherstburg, Ontario, at the foot of the Detroit River, in water just over there. Hull reached Detroit on 5th July, where he was reinforced by detachments of Michigan militia, including the 140 men of the Michigan Legionary Corps, which Hull had established in 1805. The American army was short of supplies, especially food, as Detroit provided only soap and whiskey. Nevertheless, Eustis urged Hull to attack Amherstburg. The fort there was defended by 300 British regulars, mainly from the 41st Regiment of Foot, 400 Indians, and some, principally Essex militia. The post's commander was Colonel St. George, who was later superseded by Colonel Henry Proctor of the 41st. Hull was not enthusiastic and wrote to Eustis that the British command the water and the savages. Nevertheless, his army crossed into Canada on 12th July. He issued several proclamations which were intended to induce Canadians to join or support his army, while some of his mounted troops raided up the Thames River as far as Moravian Town. These moves discouraged many of the militia from opposing his invasion, but few of the inhabitants of the region actively aided him, even those who had recently moved from the United States. There were several indecisive skirmishes with British outposts along the Canard River. Hull decided that he could not attack the British fort without artillery, which could not be brought forward because the carriages had decayed and needed repair, and fell back. Several of his officers disagreed with this retreat and secretly discussed removing him from command. Hull had been quarreling with his militia colonels since taking over the army, and he felt that he did not have their support in the field or in their councils of war. British moves. On 17th July, a mixed force of British regulars, Canadian fur traders, and Indians captured the important trading post of Mackinac Island on Lake Huron from its small American garrison, who were not aware that war had been declared. Many of the Indians who had taken part in the attack either remained at Mackinac or returned to their homes, but 100 or more Sioux, Menominee, and Winnebago warriors began moving south from Mackinac to join those already at Amherstburg, while the news induced the previously neutral Wyandots living near Detroit to become increasingly hostile to the Americans. Hull learned of the capture of Mackinac on 3rd August, when the paroled American garrison reached Detroit by schooner. He feared that this had opened the northern hive of Indians, and so abandoned all the Canadian territory that he held. Hull's supply lines ran for 60 miles, 97 kilometers, along the Detroit River and the shore of Lake Erie, which was dominated by the British armed vessels, making them vulnerable to British and Indian raiders. A raiding party under Tecumseh ambushed and routed an American detachment under Major Van Horn on 4th August at the Battle of Brownstown, capturing more of Hull's dispatches. Hull sent a larger party